It's Red Eye Radio. Talk about everything from politics to social issues and news of the day. Whether you're up late or you're just starting your day, welcome to the show. From the Uniden America Studios. For Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, Dan Mandis, this is Red Eye Radio.
866-90 Red Eye. There is probably one big issue that Donald Trump has got to rectify when he comes into office, and that is the situation on the southern border. And of course, it's really, honest to goodness, as you folks probably have figured out, it's not necessarily about the border anymore. It's about who's crossed the border. Daily Mail has a headline. Fears grow over spread of sadistic super gang Tren de Aragua across America as experts issue chilling new warning. So we're going to talk about that because the spread of this vicious, horrific gang, I think, has caught a lot of people by surprise. And so we're going to get into some of these numbers because they're going to be in more than half of America by the time February rolls around. And so there is some good news regarding the border and what is going on the southern border. Just very quickly, then I'll get to the Tren de Aragua stuff because it really is terrifying, especially if you folks live in a Democrat-run city. If you live in a Democrat-run city, you're really going to need to hear what I have to say. But there is some good news. Tom Homan was on Fox News, and he says that businesses have now been reaching out to him, and they've been saying, listen, we bought the remnants of the border wall for pennies on the dollar from the Biden administration. Most of you folks know what that story is all about. Donald Trump, he promised the American people he would build a wall. When he left office the first time, there was a bunch of remnants of the wall there. And Biden decided in his infinite wisdom to sell the remnants of the wall for pennies on the dollar because Joe Biden was trying to, and the Biden administration was trying to hamstring Donald Trump. And so Trump literally came out and he said, please, Joe, don't sell the wall. We're just going to have to rebuy everything, and that's going to slow down the construction of the wall because that's what we're trying to do. That's what the American people wanted us to do. Tom Homan had a nice surprise the other day.
However, a little bit of good news. One of the companies actually reached out to me, willing to give us that border wall products back at what they paid for it, the pennies on the dollar, giving us back for the same price. So I think Ken Paxton, the AG in Texas, took immediate action. I know I've been working with Lindsey Graham, taking immediate action. So right now I think we got them stopped. But it's insulting. They wait 4 years just before we take control to sell a main piece of our plan to secure that border.
Yeah, it absolutely a nasty piece of work. And here's the thing. Joe Biden got creamed in this last election, as did the Democrats. They know that one of the biggest issues that they lost on was the border. And so what do? They decided to sell the remnants of the wall, which, as I have said many times, that is a direct violation of the American people and what their mandate was in the November election. And, you know, it is so incredible that the American people are so incredulous at what Joe Biden has done to our country. And yet this tone-deaf Democrat Party, they just continue to do what they do, which is try to stop Donald Trump at every turn. Here in New York, the guy who set the woman on fire, the city of New York, the state of New York, they're not going to honor the request of ICE to take this guy into custody. So we'll have to see where that case goes. But the Democrats are trying to do whatever they can to stop Donald Trump from what the American people want the president-elect to do, which is deport all these bad guys. And the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be. from the Daily Mail, an exclusive. Fears are growing over the spread of a violent Venezuelan gang across the U.S., with experts warning the mobsters could have a foothold in more than half the country by February of next year. Now, I'm not talking about in a year from now. I'm talking about like February as in 4 or 5 weeks. It emerged earlier this month that Tren de Aragua, which has been dubbed the epitome of evil and MS-13 on steroids, is already operating in 18 states. This includes some of the most remote corners of the America in Colorado, North Dakota, Montana, Nevada, Wyoming. The bloodthirsty criminals also maintain strongholds in major cities across Texas, as well as New York and Chicago. And oh, look, where are people being burned to death? Where are people being murdered? Chicago and New York, Los Angeles, other places too. Members of the South American mafia have since crept into the U.S. via the U.S. southern border, hidden among the 1 million Venezuelan migrants who have entered the country under the Biden administration. See, it's all great and all that Tom Homan, the incoming border czar, has been able to procure some of the wall parts, some of the remnants of the wall that the Biden administration sold. But it almost feels like it's too late, doesn't it? I mean, these people are already here. Now, what states are currently infected by Tren de Aragua? Well, sadly, my state of Tennessee is one of them. Tennessee, Georgia, Florida. See if your state's in here. North Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey, New York, Wisconsin, Illinois, again, Tennessee, Louisiana, Texas, Colorado, Wyoming, North Dakota, Montana, Utah, Nevada, and, of course, California. And that's only the cities and the states that we know that they're at. I mean, they could be in other states as well. We just don't know where they are. That's part of the problem that the Biden administration and has caused. And so now the Trump administration, they've got governors and mayors, and they're saying that they're going to do everything they can to battle Donald Trump. I mean, I could go through, like, for example, the state of Texas, right? Lone Star State has said it will seek the death penalty for 2 alleged Tren de Aragua members accused of raping and killing that 12-year-old girl in Houston. It's an awful story. And we see this over and over again. The 12-year-old, of course, Jocelyn Nungary, she was murdered back in June. And these 2 guys, of course, everybody knows, they come across the southern border and they do horrific things. And so the more time goes on, the more dangerous it is for the American people. And it's interesting because with the death of Jimmy Carter, there's a lot of these conversations about who was the worst president, Joe Biden or Jimmy Carter. On Fox News, they're talking about, and it was a really good segment, actually. They're talking about Joe Biden's legacy and how his legacy is, quite frankly, not going to be pretty for the obvious reasons. But they had a bunch of Democrats, and we're talking about this earlier in the show. They had a bunch of Democrats who were trying to, as I not so affectionately say, they're trying to shine the wretched piece of crap that the Joe Biden administration has been. You know, you can't shine crap. The Democrats can try all day long, but you just can't. And so Karen Finney, one such Democrat in this panel on CNN, she tried to talk about the positive things that happened during the Biden administration. But let's be honest, there's not a lot of positive things that have happened, and she understands that.
Look, I think in the longer term, we will remember that this is a president and vice president who helped us come back from the brink during COVID, when people were dying by the hundreds of thousands on a daily basis, and we were in our homes, and companies and small businesses were falling off a cliff. And he helped to get vaccines, get us out of our homes, get us back to work.
Did he? Did Joe Biden really get us back to work, or were we already headed back to work? And by the way, just to be clear, more people died under Biden's watch. He mandated the vaccines, which was very unpopular at the time and still is. Plus, let's not forget the disinformation about where Biden said, if you get vaccinated, you can't get the virus. Everybody knows that was a lie. And I would remind this Karen Finney that it wasn't Biden who got the vaccines manufactured. Like it or not, it was Donald Trump. And he got not one but two. And she talks about Biden getting people back with the American Rescue Plan. Memo to Karen Finney and anyone else who hasn't actually listened to all those economists, they will tell you, literally, they will tell you that 9.3, 9.4% inflation that we all felt, that was caused by the American Rescue Plan. That actually helped to fuel the skyrocketing inflation. But then this Democrat, as she's trying to talk up the Biden administration in its legacy and the waning weeks of Joe Biden's presidency, she said something that I thought was just astounding.
I think he showed up for the job. He got the work done.
Really?
I think some of the accomplishments also in the Middle East and foreign policy will also stand the test of time.
That is 10 seconds of pure, unadulterated BS. Number one, she says Joe Biden showed up for the job. He was on vacation 40% of the time. That's part of the news cycle this morning. Joe Biden is in, I don't know, what is it, St. Croix? Is that what they call it? But he's on some highfalutin vacation in some beach somewhere. But he's been gone 40% of the time, by far more than any other president. And then she talks about how his foreign policy will stand the test of time. Are you kidding me? Like, if you have nothing to say, is it okay on CNN to just start bloviating about anything? Just say something to fill up the time? Like they do over at The View? Joe Biden's foreign policy will stand the test of time, Karen Finney says. Okay, let's go through that, shall we? One of, if not our strongest ally, Israel, brutally attacked by Hamas on Joe Biden's watch. That was paid for by Iran on Joe Biden's watch. Biden allowed Iran to skirt sanctions and earn billions of dollars selling oil to China after Donald Trump left office. Because remember, Trump had his boot on the necks of the Iranians and their economy. And Biden comes in and says, all of those sanctions, you don't worry about it. Knowing full well that they are the world's number one nation for state-sponsored terrorism. And by the way, Hamas was trained by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. So Joe Biden comes into office and he just allows Iran to kickstart their economy so that they could pay for all the terrorism. And, of course, all of that was preceded by the failed pullout of Afghanistan, of course. And now Afghanistan is a horrifying place. Women's rights are completely gone, not to mention a terrorist training ground yet again. There's a headline out there this morning. Al-Qaeda resurfaces in Afghanistan with new training camps. And, yes, more Islamic schools as well. Sad, isn't it? Yeah, it is. She also speaks about, by the way, this Karen Finney, she also speaks about how Joe Biden got the hostages back, which isn't even partially true. It is like very much a lie in the sense that there's still, at last check, 100 hostages, 7 Americans. So, yeah, he got some hostages back, but there's still 7 Americans that are there and over 100 total hostages. And so personally, the whole point is that there really is no way to shine up the steaming pile of crap that has been the Biden administration. There isn't. He will leave as the worst president ever. Certainly, I would say worse than Jimmy Carter. I think the pardons of all those death row inmates and 1,500 others really did seal the deal. But Scott Jennings, of course, one of my faves, he responded, and it was a great response to this this Democrat, Karen Finney, who was trying somehow to explain in a good way what the hell we've all been through the last 4 years. Wait till you hear what Scott Jennings had to say. That's coming up next on Red Eye Radio.
This morning's USDA Farm Report is brought to you by House Products. Tested, trusted, guaranteed since 1920.
Among the top 10 weather stories for 2024, in no particular order, per USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey, October's Hurricane Milton.
A Category 5 hurricane at one time in its existence, one of the top 10 in the all-time realm of Atlantic Basin storms for both wind speeds and lowest pressure.
Weakening approaching landfall, yet still landing south of Tampa Bay as a Category 3 hurricane.
Eventually, Milton, as it crossed Florida's peninsula, resulted in 24 fatalities. Damage estimates still being tabulated, but it too could be a $100 billion storm.
Joining a list, including Hurricane Helene in September this year and Hurricane Katrina back in 2005.
Other $100 billion plus storms in the nation's modern history: Hurricane Harvey, Texas in 2017, Hurricane Ian in Florida 2022, and Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands in September of 2017.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This report brought to you by Cenex Fuels and Lubes.
Get in touch with Red Eye Radio, toll free at 866-90-RED-EYE.
You know, one of the things that Joe Biden, I believe, will be known for, as this CNN panel was talking about the soon-to-be former president, thank the Lord, is this massive cover-up within the White House and, in my opinion, within the Democrat Party. Scott Jennings was talking about this in this CNN panel, and he said, number one, he was shocked that Karen Finney, this Democrat, said, oh, you know what? Joe Biden got all the hostages back. And Jennings is like, really?
I think he's going to leave office in disgrace. The Hunter Biden pardon was disgraceful. He's going to be remembered largely for inflation and for the disastrous Afghanistan pullout. And I think as we continue to, we're just getting the first draft of this now, but as we continue to learn about the massive cover-up that went on, not about his health, but about his mental acuity, to cover that up, the efforts that were undertaken by the White House staff, by his family, not in the last couple of months, but for all 4 years, I think it's going to be a really ugly chapter. It's a diminished presidency because of it. And I think we still don't know the full extent of what they did to try to hide what they've been doing over in the West Wing.
So I think leaving in disgrace is when you have an insurrection at the Capitol. Like, that's leaving in disgrace. Being impeached twice is leaving in disgrace. So that's a difference.
So that last voice you heard is a guy named Bakari Sellers. He is a D.C. Democrat operative. And I don't know about you, but at this point, and I was like this during the campaigns, where if anybody brought up January 6th, it's just you roll your eyes and you think, oh, for the love of all that is, shut up already. Right? Bakari Sellers and the Democrats need to understand that that kind of talk lost them the election. So I would say keep it up.
Red Eye Radio from the Uniden America Studios. Now, for Gary McNamara and Eric Harley, here is Dan Mandis.
866-90 Red Eye is the phone number, 866-907-3339. I wrapped up the previous segment talking about the Democrats invoking January 6th, and this was during a segment on CNN, and this guy's name is Bakari Sellers, and they were talking about Joe Biden and his legacy, and they're talking about a reflection back on the last 4 years. And one of the things that I was talking about earlier was the difference between Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden, because both were terrible presidents. But one of the things that I think separates those two is that I believe that Jimmy Carter was a good man. I believe that Jimmy Carter, he meant well. I don't believe that Joe Biden meant well. I don't. I think that Joe Biden and the entire Democrat apparatus, they lied to the American people. And so when you have Bakari Sellers, let me play this again real quick. This was Scott Jennings on CNN, and he was talking about the absolute scandal of Joe Biden with the Wall Street Journal, saying that Joe Biden was being protected during the entirety of his 4 years in office, so that people within the Biden administration, they couldn't get close to him because they were hiding his clear mental deterioration, his cognitive deterioration. And Scott Jennings on this panel says that this is an absolute travesty, a conspiracy, and something that, in my opinion, somebody's got to pay for this. There does have to be an investigation, but Bakari Sellers, he decided to bring up January 6th. And I guess if we're going to talk about Joe Biden and everything that he has done, not only to our country as far as policy goes, but also lying to our country. And Bakari Sellers, this Democrat, has the audacity to say, oh, no, the real disgrace is Donald Trump. It's like, come on, man.
I think he's going to leave office in disgrace. The Hunter Biden pardon was disgraceful. He's going to be remembered largely for inflation and for the disastrous Afghanistan pullout. And I think as we continue to, we're just getting the first draft of this now, but as we continue to learn about the massive cover-up that went on, not about his health, but about his mental acuity, to cover that up, the efforts that were undertaken by the White House staff, by his family, not in the last couple of months, but for all 4 years, I think it's going to be a really ugly chapter. It's a diminished presidency because of it. And I think we still don't know the full extent of what they did to try to hide what they've been doing over in the West Wing.
Now, listen, you cannot argue with anything that Scott Jennings just said. And so do you know what I'm beginning to feel like with the Democrats? What do you think about this? I'm beginning to feel like the new, like, you're a racist, right? Remember when Democrats, they have no way to argue with you. Like, if you're right on all your points, they just say, well, you're a racist. I think the new you're a racist is, well, what about January 6th? I think for Democrats, you're a racist and January 6th, I think that for the Democrats, they both serve the same purpose, which is try to deflect from the fact that you have no way to defend your argument. In this case, Scott Jennings, I mean, he puts it down there and he says, here's all the problems with the Biden, well, not all the problems, clearly there were many more, but here's many of the problems within the Biden administration. This cover-up is a clear scandal. And that's true. And so what does Bakari Sellers bring up? Well, he brings up January 6th.
What they've been doing over in the West Wing.
So I think leaving in disgrace is when you have an insurrection at the Capitol. Like, that's leaving in disgrace. Being impeached twice is leaving in disgrace. So that's a difference.
So here's the thing. Nobody cares about January 6th. If they did, then Donald Trump would not have won the election. Joe Biden is so bad and such a disgrace that his arch nemesis got elected a second time. And so just like one of the things, and I mentioned this earlier, one of the things that I always think about with Jimmy Carter is that he brought us Ronald Reagan. And clearly that was a huge deal for America, clearly a huge deal for the Republican Party. Jimmy Carter brought us Ronald Reagan. Joe Biden brought us a second term of Donald Trump. But it wasn't just Joe Biden. It was also the likes of, Bakari Sellers and people. He's a Democrat operative, by the way, and people who constantly bring up January 6th like it really matters. And it doesn't matter. I think those cards, the January 6th card, that has been played ad nauseum. And as I've said now 15 times, nobody cares anymore. It's like a spouse that brings up the same thing over and over and over to the point where you, quite frankly, stop listening.
I think Joe Biden's going to be remembered in the short term for what you were talking about, whether or not he had the capacity to lead, who knew what when. I mean, there are many people outside of the very small network of Anita Dunn and Valerie Biden Owens and Jill Biden and Hunter. There aren't many people who knew the concerns that were there or whether or not he was up or fit for the job. And so
a memo to Bakari Sellers. Do you know who knew what when? Everybody knew that Joe Biden was not fit for the job since day one. I mean, we had suspicions when he was running for president and they kept him hidden in the basement. And then the more that we saw of Joe Biden, the more he clearly was not up for the job. He was not fit for the job. And so as we look back on the last 4 years, I mean, that's clearly one of the things that we do need to look at. Because the American people all knew. Republicans knew. Conservatives knew. The American people knew. From him wandering around trying to figure out how to get off of a very small stage, to him calling out for a dead congresswoman, to the reports that he could only do like important things between, if I remember right, 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. That's Joe Biden that we all knew was in the White House. And so for Bakari Sellers and Democrats and, people, some people in the media that talk about who knew what when, we all knew. They knew as well. They just wouldn't admit it because they're so infused with Trump derangement syndrome.
So those questions will be asked. Over the long term, this is somebody a lot like Mitch McConnell. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything they stood for. You don't have to agree with every vote. But you always knew they put the American people first. You always knew that.
Did you hear what he just said at the end? He put the American people first. Can we just unpack that? Did Joe, here's the question, the question on the table. Did Joe Biden put the American people first? What do you think? I don't think he did. I think he lied to the American people. I think that he put the American people last. Who did he put in first? Who was ahead of the American people? Ukraine. And illegal aliens, to name just two. So it sounds so pandering, doesn't it, Bakari Sellers? It sounds pandering. Oh, he put the American people first. Can we talk about that? Because not only did Joe Biden himself not put the American people first because of what I just said, because he put illegal aliens and an open border ahead of the American people, and he gave billions and billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. So for me, when I heard Bakari Sellers say that, I think, okay, so I'm going to expand that out because clearly Joe Biden, as you all know, he's not been the one running the country. No. Wall Street Journal very accurately reported that the country has been run by a small cabal of Biden insiders because they were trying to hide him. That's what they were hiding him. He rarely attended cabinet meetings. There's many layers around Joe Biden. And so they hit him. And so you're not there for the American people. You don't put the American people first and lie to them. You don't. You know, it's a nice little talking point, but it just doesn't work. Did you see this? Report came out over the weekend that Joe Biden, he is so delusional. Joe Biden is out there thinking, is in an article, I think it was an interview with the Washington Post or the New York Times. They're both the same to me, pieces of trash. But he's out there now saying that he is resentful and he regrets dropping from the presidential election. He actually believes that he could have beaten Donald Trump. Now, we all remember the shape that Joe Biden was in when he had that debate. You remember when Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they debated, and Biden was horrible. Joe Biden was horrible, and he was doing horribly in the polls as well. And here's the other thing that he's not remembering, of course, because he's Joe Biden. He doesn't remember much. But the donors within the Democrat Party had stopped giving. Why did they stop giving? They stopped giving because Joe Biden was doing terribly and he'd lost his mind. And no, Bakari Sellers, he did not put the American people first. Have you seen this story from the New York Times? It goes with this topic. We gave billions of dollars to Ukraine, but now the New York Times is reporting that homelessness has surged to record levels in 2024. Now, whenever I see, and I bet you're the same way, because I'd be willing to bet that when you see a headline like that, friends, first thing you think of is, boy, what would have happened if we had given the billions of dollars that we gave Ukraine and funneled it and focused it on our own people here in America? Like, for example, the homeless folks. Homelessness has surged big time here in 2024. It's probably one of the things that this year will be remembered by. Driven by forces that included high rents, stagnant wages, and a surge in migrants seeking asylum, the federal government reported on Friday. So obviously, imagine again if we had invested all that money, the never-ending billions of dollars going to Ukraine. Just imagine what we could have done with that money to help all of the homeless here in America. It's sad but true. 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis in for Gary and Eric. This is Red Eye Radio.
Lines open for your calls. 866-90-RED-EYE on Red Eye Radio.
Red Eye Radio, 866-90-RED-EYE is the phone number, 866-907-3339. Dan Mandis here for Gary and Eric. One of my favorite shows when I was a kid was the show Alice. Sad to report Linda Lavin, who played Alice, has passed away. And so I'm trying to find out more information on it. But yeah, it looks like word came down last night. Actress Linda Lavin of Alice fame has died, 87 years old. That's one of the rough things about getting older, right? Because I'm a man of a certain age. I just turned 57. Happy birthday to me. But the older that you get, the people that you watched growing up, they're starting to die off. And so the more that they die off, then, of course, this happens. I'm sure you can relate to this. The more of the people that you used to watch as a kid and as you were growing up, the more that they start dying off, the more you start realizing your own mortality. And so that is how I personalize these deaths that way, and I'm sure a lot of you folks do as well. There's actually been studies on that, where when the people that you watched growing up start dying off, it just reminds you as to how short life can be. So Linda Lavin, again, dead at the age of 87. Of course, we've been talking all morning long, all evening long, about the death of Jimmy Carter. I do find it interesting and incredibly sad that there's a lot of Democrats out there that are giddy, excited, because the flags will be at half staff for Donald Trump's inauguration. Seriously, there's Democrats that are excited about that. Really sad.
This is Red Eye Radio on Westwood One.